is Series 3 of Away, a podcast for anyone exploring 12-step sobriety. I'm your host, Steph Roberts. This is, I want to say episode 8 of Series 3. We are going to start we're going to start and finish step 5 in the 12 and 12. That's my cat Jack asking for treats. I don't have that much to rant and rave about right now, which is, maybe a little unusual. If you know me, you know I like a good rant. My Alexia riced cauliflower is cooking for my dinner. My husband is out. So I have the house to myself tonight, which means podcasting and painting. I've been getting really into do-it-yourself and redoing my bathroom, because we don't have any extra money right now. I don't want to say anything like we're broke, because we're not broke. But there just isn't anything extra. And rather than feeling badly about the things I want to do for the house, I thought I'll teach myself how to do it. And I have. And I've been so far pretty successful. And I'm really enjoying it. With it comes this sense of pride that's kind of awesome. Anyway, let's delve right into step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Okay, let's immediately start by rephrasing or reframing the step. Let's say admitted to ourselves and someone supportive the exact nature of our wrongs as we understand them when we first embark on this process. I don't know if that makes sense more or less to you. I'm just kind of taking the God part out and emphasizing that you should talk to someone with whom you feel safe, really and truly safe. And when I say the exact nature of our wrongs as we understand them, I say that because, if you're in your first 90 days or even your first year, you only know what you know. There'll be things you remember much later, things you didn't see in your step 4. You couldn't see. In my opinion, you don't need to do steps 4 and 5 over and over and over again. Because I think by the end of this process, you'll have laid a foundation and you'll, quote unquote, intuitively know how to handle things that used to baffle you, as promised in the big book. Okay, let's read. All of AA's 12 steps ask us to go contrary to our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. Okay, so I don't agree that they are all natural desires. Some of the desires we have been manufactured, so to speak. They're habits. Our bad behavior and desires to use and abuse substances are not always natural. They may feel natural because you've developed the habit, but I don't think they're necessarily natural in the way this means. And right, they feel natural because they've developed over a long time. Anyway, of course, all of us did not need ego deflation or identified with this aspect at all. So why don't we instead say, All of AA's 12 steps ask us to do something uncomfortable. They ask us to examine and address parts of ourselves that we may not feel ready to examine. Reading. But scarcely any step is more necessary to long-time sobriety and peace of mind than this one. AA experience has taught us that we cannot live alone with our pressing problems and the character defects which cause or aggravate them. If we have swept the searchlight of step 4 back and forth over our careers and it has revealed in stark relief those experiences we'd rather not remember, if we have come to know how wrong thinking and action have hurt us and others, then the need to quit living by ourselves with those tormenting ghosts of yesterday gets more urgent than ever. We have to talk to somebody about them. So I mostly agree with this, because this step, as we've said, is about getting comfortable with doing uncomfortable things, right? It's also about making human connections, or spiritual, if you're so inclined. But even with God, God is not enough. The human animal needs connection with other human animals. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, or maybe you already read about it, but if you haven't read about the orphanages in Romania under the dictator Ceausescu, I think that's how you say it, Ceausescu, he had banned all abortion, made all abortion impossible, which meant there were a lot of babies and a lot of children without parents or homes, most of whom were in orphanages, very restricted from contact with other humans. Many of the newborns in care, as it were, died literally from lack of physical affection and contact, as did many of the children had incredibly delayed learning, if not traumatized forever. And a big part of it, there was all sorts of horrific things that went on in the orphanages, but a lot of the studies speak to the lack of affection and connection with other humans in a real way. Anyway, check out New York Times has a good piece. I think Live Science has a good piece. The Guardian had a great one. I think it was called Ceausescu's Children. Powerful stuff. But it's also like, it's real. We need connection to other humans. Reading. But of the things which really bother and burn us, we say nothing. Certain distressing or humiliating memories, we tell ourselves, ought not to be shared with anyone. These will remain our secret. Not a soul must ever know. We hope they'll go to the grave with us. So, I mean, dramatic, yes. Accurate, yes, in my experience. To really bond with anyone over anything, we know, like it or not, that truth and sincerity matter more than anything. Really, true bonds are formed with others when we are ourselves. And so it goes in AA. I think the thing that's difficult is that we are expected to share these things with someone we barely know, or if we've gotten to know them, we don't maybe trust them completely yet. The Big Book itself makes clear that while a sponsor is one option for this, a shrink is fine too. A clergyman, they say. And I agree with a caveat. It can be really awesome to share some of that really yucky stuff with someone who has also done really yucky stuff and who can say to you, yeah, been there, or yeah, I did that, or I get it, and better still, wait, I've done worse. At some point, and this is mostly when you start to help others, you'll get to turn your shame upside down. You'll use it to help the next person who feels just like you do when you're doing step 5, or you did. But if we never do this step or do it thoroughly, we aren't really that well equipped to help a newcomer. That's not to say rush into it and do it fast, but you do ultimately want to be able to pass on a big part of the message, which is to use your own yuck to help someone else feel less yuck. Okay, we're going to skip this next paragraph. Yet if AA's experience means anything at all, this is not only unwise, but actually perilous resolve, blah, blah, blah. This paragraph is way too dramatic, and of course you can stay sober without doing this step. Or you can stay sober doing it a slightly different way, like with a shrink. But I have hopefully outlined the ways in which it may help you in the long run to do it, say with someone else in the rooms or a sponsor, someone who's stayed sober longer than you. Okay, skipping down. This practice of admitting one's defects to another person is, of course, very ancient. It has been validated in every century, and it characterizes the lives of all spiritually centered and truly religious people. But today, religion is by no means the sole advocate of this saving principle. Psychiatrists and psychologists point out the deep need every human being has for practical insight and knowledge of his own personality flaws, and for a discussion of them with an understanding and trustworthy person. So, as I was saying, and we know that today, and they knew that then. I don't even know if they had the complete understanding of it then in the way they do, but, that could just speak to them being way more forward-thinking than some of their fellows. Okay, next page. What are we likely to receive from step 5? For one thing, we shall get rid of that terrible sense of isolation we've always had. Almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. Even before our drinking got bad and people began to cut us off, nearly all of us suffered the feeling that we didn't quite belong. Either we were shy and dared not draw near others, or we were apt to be noisy good fellows craving attention and companionship, but never getting it, at least to our way of thinking. There was always that mysterious barrier we could neither surmount nor understand. It was as if we were actors on a stage, suddenly realizing that we didn't know a single line of our parts. That's one reason we loved alcohol too well. It did let us act extemporaneously, but even Bacchus boomeranged on us. We were finally struck down and left in terrified loneliness. When we reached AA, and for the first time in our lives stood among people who seemed to understand, the sense of belonging was tremendously exciting. We thought the isolation problem had been solved. But we soon discovered that while we weren't alone anymore in a social sense, we still suffered many of the old pangs of anxious apartness. Until we had talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing, we still didn't belong. Step 5 was the answer. It was the beginning of a true kinship with man and God. So, each of us may identify with all aspects of this description. Having been around a while now, I would argue that most of us identify with at least some of what it says here. Feeling less than, as people like to say, feeling different, feeling anxious, worrying about fitting in. All of those can lead to a sense of isolation, right? And alcohol, for many of us, can cure those feelings and therefore get us back out into the world. But here's the rub. At some point, we all start to put the alcohol or drugs before the human connection. So even when we first used it to make a human connection, it's kind of turned on us. So a big, huge part of recovery is learning how to make connections without alcohol or drugs. It is not necessarily the whole picture. You may need psychotherapy and meds, like I do, because your anxiety, depression, whatever may be life-altering and not merely shyness. It may be from trauma that, if resolved in psychotherapy, will really make a difference. As for the last line of those two paragraphs, I think we can simply rephrase it or erase it altogether, and we'll still get what we need for recovery and a relatively more contented life. Step 5 was a big part of the solution. It was the beginning of creating real and lasting connections with others, and the beginning of the end of feeling so fucking lonely and hating ourselves and everyone else. That's my rephrase. Okay, reading. Often it was while working on this step, next page, with our sponsor or spiritual advisor, that we first felt truly able to forgive others, no matter how deeply we felt they had wronged us. Our moral inventory had persuaded us that all-around forgiveness was desirable, but it was only when we resolutely tackled step 5 that we inwardly knew we'd be able to receive forgiveness and give it too. Another great dividend we may expect from confiding our defects to another human being is humility, a word often misunderstood. To those who have made progress in AA, it amounts to a clear recognition of what and who we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. I mean, honestly, I couldn't do much better in the wording with that. Do I agree with every part of it? No, I don't like saying moral inventory. I don't like defects, but taking a close look at yourself helps in a lot of ways. Therefore, our first practical move toward humility must consist of recognizing our deficiencies. No defect can be corrected unless we clearly see what it is. So again, the language, we can't change what we can't see, though. Not necessarily deficiencies or defects, right? Perhaps damages or defenses. But we can't change any of it if we don't take a minute to look at it, to examine it. Next page. Too much guilt and remorse might cause us to dramatize and exaggerate our shortcomings. Or anger and hurt pride might be the smokescreen under which we were hiding some of our defects while we blamed others for them. Possibly, too, we were still handicapped by many liabilities, great and small. Hence, it was most evident that a solitary self-appraisal and the admission of our defects based upon that alone wouldn't be nearly enough. We'd have to have outside help if we were surely to know and admit the truth about ourselves, the help of God and another human being. Only by discussing ourselves, holding back nothing, only by being willing to take advice and accept direction, could we set foot on the road to straight thinking, solid honesty, and genuine humility. So again, we only know what we know. We can only see what we can see. So another part of this step, and why it can be helpful to do it with a shrink sometimes, is that another more objective perspective is kind of important. We all have blind spots. And we should. A lot of us had them, I don't know, it's like wearing blinders. A lot of us wore them to protect ourselves from, during, or after trauma. And they're hard to take off. They're easier to take off with the help of someone else. But again, someone with whom you feel safe. Not just someone who said, I'm your sponsor, do whatever I say. Someone you've grown to trust. And the God part, whether you're looking at this through a secular lens or not, for a believer, God's in there, but you can't just tell him. Like, if you believe in him or it already knows all these things. So you can certainly pray about it and talk to your higher power about it. But don't forget, we are not a hotbed of mental health. So, what if God's just your crazy brain? I mean, no matter what, it's important to talk to another human being. And if you believe, then God is working through that person to help you. But you have to seek the help, right? Whatever that saying is, God helps those who seek, or I don't know. Hopping down the page. At this stage, the difficulties of trying to deal rightly with God by ourselves are twofold. Though we may at first be startled to realize that God knows all about us, as I just said, we are apt to getting used to that quite quickly. Somehow, being alone with God doesn't seem as embarrassing as facing up to another person. Until we actually sit down and talk aloud about what we have so long hidden, our willingness to clean house is still largely theoretical. When we are honest with another person, it confirms that we have been honest with ourselves and with God. My usual rant about the psychopath in my husband's home group, who, never apologized to his victims. That's where I think this kind of comes in, or maybe in later steps 9, but finding Jesus, telling Jesus, not enough. So God or not, the other human being part is important. Dare I say more important. The second difficulty is this. What comes to us alone may be garbled by our own rationalization and wishful thinking. Or we're just crazy. The benefit of talking to another person is that we can get his or her direct comment and counsel on our situation. They can help us point out the crazy. But keep in mind that your sponsor's not a doctor, okay? Even if they're a doctor in the real world, they're not your doctor. So you do have to sometimes take the advice with a grain of salt. A good sponsor should not be giving you advice on anything he or she hasn't experienced him or herself. The whole point of the program is to help people because of our own experience, using our own wisdom based on our own experience. Skip down. While the comment or advice of others may be by no means infallible, it is likely to be far more specific than any direct guidance we may receive while we are still so inexperienced in establishing contact with a power greater than ourselves. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's rephrase it. While the comments or advice of others is never infallible, it is likely to be helpful as we try to do things we've never done before. So it's worth talking to another person. Next page. We shall want to speak with someone who is experienced, who not only has stayed dry, but who has been able to surmount other serious difficulties perhaps like our own. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to finish up on this page, I think, actually. The real tests of the situation are your own willingness to confide and your full confidence in the one with whom you share your first accurate self-survey. Even when you found the person, it frequently takes great resolution to approach him or her. No one ought to say the AA program requires no willpower. Thank you. I just need to reiterate that. Because I've said often that, you need to give yourself a pat on the back. This is willpower to a degree, God or not. You have to make choices every day. In the beginning, that choice is to not pick up a drink, to not pick up a drug. Whether you have the hand of God, whether you have the support of others, there is a lot of this that is about willpower of a kind. And it does take that willpower because it takes getting through an uncomfortable situation to ask someone to help you. Happily, though, the chances are that you will be in for a very pleasant surprise. When your mission is carefully explained and it is seen by the recipient of your confidence how helpful he can really be, the conversation will start easily and will soon become eager. Before long, your listener may well tell a story or two about himself. So I think test almost seems like the wrong word. Something about it feels aggressive, maybe, or competitive. But it's really like, how willing are you to try this for real? And are you willing to do something really uncomfortable, or even just a little uncomfortable, depending on who you are? So there's not much more to say about step 5. I know to some people it's daunting. I am someone who's been very lucky in that my entire life I've been very vocal about what's wrong with me, because I grew up in a family where you never vocalize that. No such thing as a victim. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off. We don't really talk about it. And I think my rebellion in part was talking about it, like saying it out loud. I never didn't admit to medication. I never denied my anger. So for me, this was not a daunting step, telling someone else. Whom to tell was a little bit daunting, because there were people in the rooms I didn't trust. I've always been aware that it is, a microcosm of the real world, and not everybody is trustworthy. So I went a little bit on instinct and reputation when choosing the sponsor to work with. I would have done this with a shrink. I have a friend who did it with a shrink. It does help to know that the person you're talking to has done really shitty stuff too. Most people have done something really shitty in their lives. Most people don't have a white horse. Is it a white horse? High horse. Most people don't really have a high horse, even though they pretend to. But, some people just feel more judgmental than others, and you probably don't want that doing your 5th step. And again, it depends on what it is you're revealing. You might feel like you don't have very much to reveal, which should make this a little bit easier. Anyway, I think I've driven home the point that I really do think, no matter what, it's important to share your step 4 stuff with another person. Whether you or not you also share it with God, because it really does help. The relief and freedom, maybe I should read a little bit more. Because I think the end of the chapter kind of... There's my dog. Uma. Sorry about that. I think the end of the chapter really does kind of talk about... Oh boy, she's on a roll. Some of the hope, Last page. Provided you hold back nothing, your sense of relief will mount from minute to minute. The dammed up emotions of years break out of their confinement and miraculously vanish as soon as they are exposed. Many in AA, once agnostic or atheist, tells us that it was during this stage of step 5 that he first actually felt the presence of God, and even those who had faith already often become conscious of God as they never were before. So, as I said, I've said in past episodes, I think a good sponsor actually starts by sharing some of his or her bad experience in order to make you feel more comfortable. And I think, as I've said before, a true bond of any kind means being genuine, being yourself. being as sincere and honest as possible. As for the emotions miraculously vanishing, that is an overstatement, but it does help you heal. It's the beginning of letting go. Saying stuff out loud, sharing our pain and anger, helps relieve it. That's just true for all humans. Now, I did not feel anything supernatural at this point, and you don't have to either. If you're not a God person, whatever label you put on it, the feeling is fucking relief. A lot of the stuff that seemed really bad in your head just isn't as bad when you finally say it out loud, especially if it's to someone understanding and trustworthy. And it can be pretty bloody amazing to feel like you're taking a deep breath for the first time in years. Call it whatever you want. Okay, the last paragraph. This feeling of being at one with God and man, this emerging from isolation through the open and honest sharing of our terrible burden of guilt, brings us to a resting place where we may prepare ourselves for the following steps toward a full and meaningful sobriety. Yes, but let's rephrase this. This meaningful connection to our fellow travelers means we can find some relief from the burdens of guilt, shame, remorse, anguish, anger, anxiety. And therefore, we can move forward in our program of recovery and toward a happier life. And toward a happier life. And I think Uma, my cute little dog, agrees. With that, I hope this helped a little in navigating, understanding step 5. And I hope it reminded you that no matter what, there is a way.